Ludo Van der Heyden, thanks for joining us on INSEAD Knowledge. You're Professor of Technology and Operations Management. You spoke recently in Abu Dhabi at a conference about companies overreacting to the downturn, to the crisis. Why do you think that they are overreacting at the moment?
Yeah, my comment was especially following a visit to Dubai, where, of course, with the big real estate crisis there was true panic. And I felt there was too much overreaction, with a lot of people even questioning the Dubai project.
Do you think companies and businesses are overreacting generally?
Typically they do. I would have two arguments. One argument is I study a lot of family businesses, and family businesses are much more anticipative and have a longer term, react less in a bang way, and very often are more profitable over the long run than non-family firms. And one of the reasons is they don't overreact. And the result of that is that they cut smarter and less deep in the downside and are in the best position to profit when the upside is. And so at the beginning of the cycles, family businesses typically are there and profit a lot because the others have overreacted. So I think that's one. The second reason is sort of more a systemic view, which is that if you don't make small adjustments, sort of as needed for a reason of careful management, you will tend to sort of hold and be inflexible, and at some point you'll have to do a major turn. So I think that sort of overreacting behavior is I think quite symptomatic, I think, or quite often in business.
So your advice to companies would be not to have such a knee-jerk reaction, but to take a longer-term view.
I think sort of knee-jerk reactions very often are the result of the fact that you have been in some way not watching things and that you've not been anticipating things. You could summarize a lot of social science research that says that a sequence of small steps, it's much easier to manage than one big step. A good example, for example, in government would be the European Union project, which is lots of small steps amounting to a big step at the end. So my advice always is take the stairway, go to the next floor one step at a time. But in some companies, somehow you take the elevator from the ground floor to the 27th floor, and the world has changed when you get to the 27th floor, and that's a big change.
Could companies really anticipate what was coming along? I mean, given that we're in such a hole at the moment.
Well, I think the current hole is. We are in a hole, but I think we're in a hole of management. We're not in a hole. Many people complain and say we have a crisis in capitalism. I think I see it much more as a crisis of poor management, basically, some people knew what was happening, but the herd instinct was too big. The money was too tempting, and people lost their common sense. But there are companies who didn't go into a lot of these financial instruments or in these derivative instruments, and who decided they didn't understand it and they didn't go for it. So sort of saying that everybody went there is false. I think we are in a hole of basically what I call a hole of a failure of governing management. I think it's if you look at the U.S., the U.S. had a biggest corporate governance reform, Sarbanes-Oxley, and this came as a reaction to Enron, and a big opportunity was missed to really put governance in more in a central view, and governance as a way of motivating managers and also disciplining them, but also motivating them. And I think the governance in the U.S. has been too financial, with a view, the ultimate surprise is that shareholders have actually incentivized managers to be more short-term than they would have been. And that has sort of created a big element of the crisis.
So what do you think businesses, companies should be doing right now?
I think there should be a lot of reflection inwards in terms of making sure to distinguish what the business needs to keep doing and what needs to change. I think that's very important. So we talked a little bit about overreaction, is that the overreaction certainly shouldn't be that we're going to change the whole business. We have to keep doing a lot of things we were doing before, but there are things that we need to do more of, and there are other things we need to do less of. And I think that's, for me, the key advice is have a clear discussion and a clear statement on what do we need to keep doing, because we will get out of the crisis, hopefully. Though there's a lot of change in the crisis, a lot of industry leaders don't survive the crisis. But we will be in business coming out of the crisis, and we want to come out of the crisis in good shape. So what is it that we believe in, that we will keep doing? And I think that's the platform of hope on which you can then build your change effort, which is managing the storm.
When you say believe in, are you talking about values?
Yes, also values. I think that we believe in our products, but maybe there are some products that maybe we're going to do less of, and other products we're going to do more of. I think now is the let me sort of come with an example. How come it's Tata Industries which is trying to build a car for 2,000 euros? That was the open segment in the market for the last 30 years. How come the Fiats, the Peugeots, the Renaults, have not sort of entered that market? I mean, that's something that I think certainly should be pushed. And if anything, the crisis should make people more aware of that. I think probably the green effect, though it's very expensive, smart answers to the green challenge. To electric cars, I think is going to happen. Typically in a crisis, you go for some niches. What are the niches we're going to keep serving, but maybe new niches that we're going to open with sort of different products. So I think it is a very useful time to review your strategy. And where I think it's very important, you can't tell a manager, keep on doing what you did before, but change everything. Whenever people say, I agree with you, but that means they disagree with you. So some people should be, working on continuing the business and working on the business, presumably because volume has decreased in a smaller number. And other people freed up, should work on future projects and on new niches, adding services, designing new products, etc. And I think for me, that's the first message. That's the key message. Maybe the thing that is more important as well is that in a crisis, you have to do more emotional management. You actually don't have much money. Money is extremely precious. So you have to be much more humble, much more honest, much more human. And I think that's a great opportunity, because I think a lot of the values of business disappeared precisely because of the money and the wealth. And I think hopefully that part of the crisis will be a useful one. Restoring that business is one of the key factors that will get us out of the crisis. And of course, the financial world has gotten us into the crisis. But one should also say that the financial world is not just a financial world. I think a lot of consumption was fueled by housing prices and housing price increases. So this financial bubble had a positive impact on the real economy. So, I mean, there's so much surprise in the current crisis that somehow now people say, oh gosh, the financial crisis has effects in the real economy. Well, actually, the growth of the financial sector did have effects on the real economy. So if the financial sector goes down, then there will be impact on the real economy. So I think there are, maybe I'm a positive-minded person, but I see good parts of this crisis. There was too much nonsense in business. And perhaps there was too much, perhaps I should maybe eliminate the perhaps, there was some nonsense maybe in our teaching as well. And I think we certainly as teachers should look inwards and sort of say, what is our analysis, what's our diagnosis, and what could we have done differently, and do we need to do differently in the future to reduce the probability of this happening? Because it's a mess, and the people who suffer are basically not the people that are responsible for it. And this is a construction of management. This is not a construction of the bank teller, of the shop floor employee, of the government worker. This is a crisis that was made by managers, and that's why business schools, are to be looked at and take responsibility for this as well.
And it was a major failure of corporate governance.
Absolutely. I think managers...
And risk assessment.
Certainly, very good you say this. Risk management will, I think, from now on be a serious subject in business school, and not just risk in the portfolio, but also risk in the way of managing a business. Because the problem with the portfolio analysis is that I hedge my risk, and therefore I have enough reserve in my portfolio to allow companies to or some investments to go poorly. Now, this notion of risk management in a financial sense does not apply, immediately to business. You can't sort of say, well, let a few businesses blow up, because that's okay, we'll have other businesses. But one of the answers, I think, that will come out is the corporate holding structure. The GEs, come out of this crisis in a much better way because they do not have all their eggs in the same basket. So the notion of, I think, portfolio, the famous holding structure, which is so decried for being inefficient, in my view is one way to mitigate the risk in a business sense, not also in a financial sense, but also in the business sense. So I think risk management is very much in. And I think another subject that will come out of the crisis as very important, because it still is in such poor infant shape, is the subject of governance, which is how do you ensure that managers do what is needed to make the business thrive and really make the business pay for society, create value. And to maybe as a third view is, I think the fact that the shareholder pays for everything will be replaced with the notion that we need to provide value for customers. And that in the end, it's not the shareholder who pays for everything, it's the customer who pays for everything, including the profits of the shareholder. So I think we're going to move from an old, if you wish, Marxian divide between, labor and capital, and then maybe management in the middle, to much more, sort of shareholders, capital, labor, and customers. And I think we're going to go to a much more customer-driven economy and customer values, and I think maybe customer democracy. And I think that will have some impact in the governance debate in a way that it certainly doesn't have today, because the customers are being dealt with in the markets and therefore don't need to be dealt with in the boardroom. And I think that's wrong.
You wrote a year or so ago about why fairness matters. Do you think then that we will see greater fairness, greater transparency?
I think transparency is a key element of fairness, and I think transparency will be increased. I think the fact we should never forget that a whole banking sector was built offline from the balance sheet. This I think will no longer. And what was the principal reason? Because the whole idea was to keep it secret from scrutiny and that it was kept separate. So I think transparency will be one of the values which I think will be stronger, and transparency for the customer. I think that's sort of for me, one of the central governance notions which will be developed, which is, if we make this arrangement, if we pay you, Stuart, as our manager, can we honestly and shamelessly say that to the customer and say, thank you very much, Mr. Customer, because you are actually paying for Stuart and you're also paying for us. And I think that's a good arrangement for you, not just for the shareholder. And that, I think, thinking is for me a different kind of thinking. And that will be hopefully one of the changes. I haven't heard much of that for the moment, but hopefully it will come. And so I very much subscribe to Ray Emanuel, which is this is too big a crisis to let it go wasted. We need business practice needs to come out cleaner out of this crisis.
Ludo Van der Heyden, Solvay Chaired Professor in Technological Innovation. Thanks for joining us on INSEAD Knowledge.
A pleasure, Stuart.